Hey everyone, I'm Joel with Dissecting DIY, and today we are going to go over the EMP Shield installed in a 2016 Nissan Rogue. Now there are smaller versions available with the same amount of protection, so let's go ahead and get into the video, and then after the video I'll explain why you might want one of these devices, and I'll also bring up another company that I found that deals with this, where the creator of a company called Disasterp Repair has a similar method in dealing with EMP. Let's go get into the video. Hey everyone, I'm Joel with Dissecting DIY, and today we're going to be installing a EMP shield for your vehicle on a Nissan Rogue. Now I'm not going to be doing any modifying of the cables, but it is something you can do. But they have this fuse down at the end here, and I really just didn't want to bother with changing the length, although you can change the length. It's just you do have to incorporate this fuse. Now it's something that they added that my other one doesn't have. In the Nissan Rogue that we're going to be installing in, there's a lot of tight quarters in terms of places that look perfect to place this thing, but they're just not. Also unlevel surfaces, so we were going to try doing above the wheel well, something over here, as you can see, rocks. It's just not something I trust, considering that we have the pulley system and all this sensitive stuff here, the coolant and all that. I just don't want this knocking around it in case it ever falls. Now I can do a zip tie, but I mean there's not a whole lot of areas except right there to zip tie it. And then of course over time, because it doesn't have a level seal, it's just not gonna. Up here I was gonna try, but of course you have the hood latch, and that's gonna obviously cause issues, damage. And then down by the lights, there's this perfect area if you got the smaller one. So I wish we got the smaller one now, but the only problem that you would have there is if you ever had to change a headlight, it could become a problem. So the area of focus that I found, so again, up here, it's just not, it's not sturdy. There's no flat surface to really place this on. And even up here, if I wanted to drill through and put zip ties, I mean, it doesn't make contact. And while it could be a perfect area to put it, I don't trust it. I don't want anything falling down and causing issues. Of course, I could attach it right to the battery, but anytime I had to replace the battery, I'd be ripping it off and replacing 3M. So the last possible spot that I found was actually right here. It does fit. It is a tight fit. So of course as the engine compartment heats up, we're in the winter right now, but I am worried about some expansion and contraction issues. But it did seem like a good place, and this is where we're going to install it. Now, I mean, you could probably install it if you trusted the 3M tape right here in the wheel well and kind of out of sight, out of mind it. And I mean, it fits. It does fairly well in this compartment. You can put it in here. Of course, there's access and getting access to the light to make sure that it's functioning at a glance. And, that was something that I was also considering. But we're going to try it here today. There's a little hole here for zip ties. And, yeah, we're going to get underway, and I'll show you how to install it. Now, all it is applying the red lead to the red. I'm going to actually put it there. I'm going to install in between here, because this doesn't seem flat enough given the little loop connectors that they have pre-installed, and this looks like kind of the better option. And once we've done that, I'm going to probably install the ground here. I'm going to clean up that bolt a little bit, and I just wanted solid surfaces. If this bolt is too thick, we just want to find and make sure that there's metal bolts that we're attaching to, and that's essentially it. I mean, I might even be able to go up here, but again, like, even though this is riveted and welded in, we're going to do continuity testing after that. So let's go ahead and get started with the install. Now, to start the project, what you want to do is clean any surface that you'll have any 3M adhesive sticking to. Any of the dirt that is left behind will reduce the effectiveness of the adhesive, especially over time, and it can separate and start wiggling around. If you don't have any zip ties, this will become a problem. And here the air intake was just getting in the way of me taking the device in and out without damaging it. So I just removed these bolts and didn't have to do much else. The ability to separate it and move it around was enough for me to get the device in and out, as you can see here. And we pulled the 3M tape protective layer, stick it on, and it's good to go. Now here you'll notice me just adding a protective layer or a protective sheath around the wiring, and this is just because I'm going to be running this through a lot of areas where there's a lot of sharp edges. Where the fender is attached, there's this very sharp piece holding it on that's riveted in, and I didn't want these to rub and fray over time, causing a short issue. I use a healthy amount of electrical tape down the length of this sheath, and then when I'm running it around all the sharp edges, it did really come in handy because it did take some chunks, or it made some marks on the electrical tape, and it was something necessary. So I do highly recommend doing this yourself. Now, hindsight being 2020, I probably would have run the wires behind this area before sticking the EMP shield in, but it wasn't that much of a problem. I did have a lot of excess, so I did run it down into that bay there and then up under this air intake. And the extra excess, it just looped around in the back, and it didn't cause any issues at all in terms of accessing the headlight. Now we have removal or disconnecting the battery. You're going to want to disconnect the negative terminal first. I've always done it this way. I've always been told to do it this way, so that's just what I do. And then we're going to move on to the positive terminal. And then once this is disconnected, you're going to want to protect the positive terminal, because if it does touch, you don't want things arcing and anything like that with the battery. It's just something that drives me nuts, so I don't want it to damage anything just because I'm working on the battery. So now the first thing that I'm actually going to work on here is the ground, and this I attached to the vehicle's frame. Just a solid surface where 2 bolts connect. This bolt was actually pretty loose, so I'm glad that I actually decided to use it, and then I tightened those up again after. And it turned out to be a really good ground location that was very convenient. When you do remove this bolt here, it is going to be a little tough. It does have some Loctite, or I don't know what's on it. It just was difficult to remove. One of the things is you do want to be aware of the bolt's orientation. So you want the hex nut part sticking out. You don't want it against where the battery's going, because if you do this, you won't be able to get it off again without some work. It's just the way that the bolt orients is best that the hex nut is facing outward. And here we're going to modify the positive side of the battery terminal. This was a really convenient way to tie in that battery terminal, and I didn't have to do what I did to the negative side. Sometimes adding and removing things can be really frustrating, and I know that they offer these fuse type things on the side of the batteries now, but I just haven't gotten used to them yet and don't like tying into them. You can see me put the protective box, or this little round thing, over the positive side of the terminal, and that came in handy as it reduced arcing or anything like that. As you can see, the battery terminal just wants to, or the wire wants to press right up against that terminal. So then we tighten this down, and then we're good to go. We're going to start reattaching in reverse. So we're going to attach the positive terminal and then the negative terminal, and then we should see a green light on our EMP shield. In case the 3M adhesive does fail, it is a Velcro system, but if it does fail, I did add that zip tie that we were talking about. It's a fairly thick zip tie. I was able to get in there, and then that way, if the 3M tape ever fails, I don't have to worry about this thing knocking around or dragging around the engine compartment. Now here all we're going to do is a continuity test. So I'm going to the ground of the alternator, which I confirmed was attached to the frame, and going to see if I have continuity between my ground wire and the ground of the alternator. And there was a light that came up, so I knew that the ground was functioning. And then of course here we have confirmed the green light is on and we are protected from EMPs. At least we hope we are. And then you just want to confirm everything's nice and tight, especially the zip tie. That's what I do here. And let's get into the explanation. Okay, so you saw the video of me installing this device. Now you're probably wondering, if you haven't heard of EMP Shield before, what is the great thing about this device? Why do I need it? Well, as you can see in the picture, it is lightning proof. It has a really high speed in terms of dealing with surges. And the surges that we're worried about are, of course, an EMP or a CME, a coronal mass ejection from the sun. So the last one of those, I believe, was in the late 1800s. And then an EMP was actually experienced when the United States was doing its nuclear testing back in the 1950s, possibly in the 1960s, paraphrasing. But they detonated a nuclear bomb over the Pacific, and it wreaked havoc on all the electrical systems, and we found out about an EMP. So if you're wondering what an EMP is, well, it's exactly as I just said. It is a nuclear detonation at high altitudes above the intended target. So it's a high altitude nuclear detonation which creates ionizing radiation, which interacts with the upper atmosphere, producing an electromagnetic wave that points down or comes down at the ground. And that's where all of our sensitive electronics are. Of course, if there's any satellites up there, if they're not rated for EMP protection, they're not going to be protected. Now, most vehicles should fare well with even an EMP, although a lot of vehicles today, like my wife's vehicle, the back hatch is fiberglass. So it's not a perfect Faraday cage, not even close. So while the engine compartment and other things might do fine, the EMP, as it radiates outward, is going to be different. It depends what's going on in the atmosphere. You could be protected, but essentially line of sight is something that will cause transient energy to enter the vehicle via antennas. That's the primary method that an EMP affects electronics, is it needs a pathway. So anything with an antenna will typically be fried. But any transient energy within the car can damage the car's battery. It can damage the sensitive electronics, the ECM, the computer control module. All that stuff can be affected by an EMP. Although a lot of computer control modules are encased in metal and are technically hardened against EMP. So what this will do is pick up any transient energy within the vehicle and divert it to ground. Now, there are some great videos that criticize the technology. I do like criticism because if you're investing in this technology, you want to make sure you're not getting snake oil. So you should know that this was, it did make the DoD's EMP resilience report, this company. It does go through military standard testing in terms of EMP resilience, or basically they test at the same facility the military does to the same standard the military wants, and it did exceed military standards because it was able to take multiple EMP hits, where I believe the old military thing that they had to deal with it was a one shot. So one EMP, that's it, it's done, it's not protected. So that's something that you're going to want to know and look into. Now, the criticism was basically saying, like, there's no way you can stick anything across a battery and it's going to protect your whole vehicle. So the gentleman was a mechanic his whole life and made some interesting points. You know, how is essentially this going to protect when there's all those transistors and resistors and all the different components, all this transient energy showing up all over that? How is it going to get across? So one of the things that a lot of people aren't aware of is your car has what is called ESD protection, or electrostatic discharge protection, where its components are protected against ground faults and any type of surge. It does have its own type of mitigation circumstance where it will dump energy where it's not supposed to be to ground. Now then the gentleman goes on to say, I don't get why it has its own ground, because the negative terminal literally goes to your car frame. If you were to follow that wire, he says, it would go to your car frame. Yes, you are correct. What I was reading once I saw that criticism, because he made interested, valid points that I wanted to learn about. And again, I'm not knocking anyone that has criticism of this thing. If you think it's a fraud, then don't invest in it. For sure, don't invest in it. But there were some things, like he was convinced that if an EMP hits, like, your electronics are just going to melt. Like, every metal component was just going to be like an elephant's foot at Chernobyl, where it just melts down. And that's not the case. Transient energy, it's the E1 isn't. It may not be a lot of energy at once, but it could be enough to fry a transistor and basically render things unusable. So anything with semiconductors. So if the ground fault protection works, and the EMP is going to actually take all that ground fault, basically all the energy coming through its protections, and try to divert the energy around the battery, because you don't want the voltage to enter the positive terminal and try to exit out the backside, or out the negative terminal, because that can damage the battery. So what the EMP Shield also does, and what another product does, is it essentially acts as a way around the battery, and it has its own ground, so it's not using the negative terminal. That's what I was able to find, and that is paraphrased. So I'm just going off of memory. I had to make a quick PowerPoint here. So what types of EMPs are there? Well, there's an E1 that happens within a nanosecond of the nuclear detonation in high altitudes. So that nanosecond, that's the highest spike of energy that you'll see, where electronics will really react to it. And again, your ground fault should help mitigate that. E2, I was told vehicles do really well against. It's typically like they are hardened to a degree against them on their own, but again, any extra help can divert power away. And then there was the E3, where you actually need miles and miles and miles of wire to essentially pick up on that energy, and that's your grid surge. That's where power will come in through the grid, fry transformers, fry refrigerators, fry all this other stuff that, if it did live for the first jolt, the E1 and the E2, it's typically going to get hit. So typically, if an EMP does hit, if you're sitting down at night and both your wife's phone goes out at the same time and all your power goes out, you got to get to your breaker and pop that switch, possibly pull your meter. But I wouldn't recommend doing that if you don't know what you're doing. Just pop the breaker off if that happens, because that's going to prevent from the grid surge. So that can't happen more than once in an 8 to 9 hour period. So once the atmosphere is charged, the enemy that did that will not be able to do it again for another 8 to 9 hours. So moving on. What is the actual threat? Is this a real threat? Well, in 2019, I started doing some research, and it turns out it is a real threat. Russia and China have both threatened to use an EMP attack to deal with the United States if the United States ever became a problem. And if we've been watching the world stage, the United States is very involved with a proxy war with Russia, if we still want to call it a proxy war, with Ukraine. And China is hell-bent on getting into Taiwan, and they can't do that if the United States is left standing. So one of the ways that they seek to deal with the United States isn't through nuclear war or direct conflict, it's through indirect conflict. So that being said, China has tested the delivery of nuclear weapons with their hypersonic missiles via balloons. So if you see all those balloons that are heading over Montana, if you were to launch hypersonic missiles over Montana, first of all, our response protocols are probably looking at other countries sending them in. It might not be looking on our own soil. Perhaps I may be unaware that how we deal with nuclear threats within our own soil. But if they were to launch 3 of those, the first one getting the highest altitude, and then the others dispersing out over the United States as best they can to distribute that more evenly, so they can get the east and west coast, depending on the height that they're able to get and the yield they're able to deliver, you can get a more even distribution. So while you can't EMP over and over again, you can try to make an equal distribution. But the bottom line is, with those balloons coming overhead, the Chinese have tested that as a delivery method. They have threatened to use an EMP. So what happens if an EMP hits and your vehicle's still up? Well, you're going to say, I'm not going to be able to get gas, so who cares? I'm not going to be able to, all the other cars on the road will be dead, so who cares? If you're in that situation, I'm sure having a vehicle to get family members to hospital, like, you don't know what's going to happen, like what things are going to be surging and this, that, and the other thing. I'm sure being able to get to a hospital, even with the lights out, for a doctor to assess the situation, because doctors don't always need all this equipment. You know, they can still stitch a wound, they can still set a bone, they can still put a cast on. Okay, so and they can also still get you to CVS for certain prescriptions that they'll have for a short amount of time. So in that short window, you could possibly be getting supplies, you could possibly be getting drinking water and food, because the other thing that they found was 90% of the population in the event of an EMP would be dead within a year. It'd take them a year to get the grid up. Within that time, 90% of the U.S. population would be dead and gone. Why is that? Well, no food, no water, no ability to get medicine, things like insulin, or keep it refrigerated and to make it. Things like exposure to too cold temps and not having any heat. So there were a lot of reasons why that the population would succumb. So do I think that these things work? I don't know. There's a lot of evidence saying that they do. There's a lot of critics saying that they don't. And we've chosen as a possible insurance policy that in case a CME happens or an EMP happens, or my wife's car gets struck by lightning or my truck gets struck by lightning, it'll be protected in some degree. Now, what does investing in this technology do? It takes me out of the supply chain. If I am able to protect my vehicles, my home, my solar, I'm up and running. I can stay in the proverbial fight. And I take myself out of supply chain. You know, if power does come back on in a relatively short amount of time, so they get it back up in 3 months, 4 months for me, I'm still going to have a lot of fried stuff that I need. I still need my boiler, which I might have oil left over from. I'm going to need my well. I'm going to need my refrigerator. And if these things blow up and I didn't protect them, well, now I'm in a very long line of people who need these things as well, and the places that build them just nuked us. Okay, so it's just an insurance policy, and it might not even work. I might just be in the same boat as everybody else, but you know what? At least I'm never going to wonder, as I starve to death, hey, would that thing have worked? Okay, let's move on. The other company that I wanted to bring up was Disasterp.com. Now, this guy has a similar manner. He's going to put this across the battery terminal. This is going to use the negative post and the wire that goes to the frame as a way to carry that transient energy out and away from the battery. You have these high saturation ferrites, which go around the wire. So if you've ever seen those USB cords with that little nub on it, that's a ferrite that helps reduce noise in the line. This is going to help reduce transient energy spikes, so it doesn't react to low voltages or the voltages of your vehicle, but it is going to suppress any high transient energy spikes from something like an EMP. Moving on to the traps. The trap for the battery is above, and the trap for the vehicle for inside the vehicle. So what his method of doing it is, not only do you want to protect the battery and do these ferrites, but you want to, wherever that energy pops up within the vehicle, you want a system that dumps everything to ground if it can do it. And that's what his traps, I believe, are doing. So that was my presentation, and that was the video of the EMP Shield and now Disasterp Repair, some of the products they have. And I've invested into the high saturation ferrites just as a mitigation factor to keep that battery up and running and to help mitigate anything else. And per all the critics, at the end of the day, I could be an idiot who's going to be broken down just like everybody else. But you know what? I'm choosing to invest in the technology based on the research I've done. It seems like, the U.S. government has gotten behind these efforts. So I know that they're not exactly the most truthful entity on the planet, but I'd like to think that they don't advertise this. It's not like they're going out of their way to get you to do it like a shot. So hopefully there's some truth to that, and hopefully there's people out there still that look out for us and trying to make sure that we're self-sufficient in being able to protect ourselves and our families. I'm Joe with Dissecting DIY. If you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like the video, hey, give me a negative comment. Tell me what you think. You know, I don't mind. But you have a good day.